So welcome, Don, to the Meet the Coaches call series. We appreciate you taking your time there in the beautiful town of Emerald, Queensland, Australia, to share us your reflections from your journey. How's the weather there in Emerald today?
Yes, thanks, Ian, for the interview. Yes, it's hot. It's hot already, and we need rain, as you'd expect out here. The dam's about 10%. So
Wow.
Yeah.
So people probably don't fully appreciate that. A lot of towns in Australia struggle with water, and I don't think it's just Australia. I think there's a lot of places around the world that are probably realising the limitations of water, but we see it on a real basis, and it's quite ironic. Sometimes you get areas that just don't get any water, and it affects not only the farmers, but affects townsfolk who rely on the water supply. So I don't know about you, but I reckon it's slowly getting drier, generally speaking, over the last decade or two. I just from living on rainwater, I sense there's less rainfall progressively.
Yep, seems like that. We've had 2 floods and 2 droughts, and I've been here 20 years.
Yeah. So we've the floods are interesting, but they don't change the fact that over the time it's just getting drier and drier. Yeah. Okay, so what brought you to Emerald, Donald? I can tell you,
Okay.
You turned up in the KSI program coming out of a country town in Queensland.
Well, it was actually for acupuncture. I was looking for somewhere to do the needles, and I knew someone here who said there wasn't an acupuncturist, so I ended up coming up here about 21 years ago.
How did you get into acupuncture then?
Well, back in the day, I was in the Navy, and I was based at Garden Island in Sydney on a ship, and I used to get some treatment up at the actually at the cross there. Sounds a bit sus, but up at the local acupuncturist, Chinese man, who ended up teaching me. So and then I followed that and did it ended up doing it full time for a short while.
Wow. So I'll jump around a little bit, but how many years did you spend in the Navy for?
About 8 years. Probably wasn't really suited to the Navy. A bit longer than I should have been. But 8 years I was posted on a couple of ships, HMAS Brisbane and 1 or 2 others, and as an engineer, electrical engineer. But that was that. Yeah.
It was an interesting contrast to the Australian culture, the American culture, where the military police support is much more supported and more common in America, where in Australia, it's we just don't give our serving members the same level of social recognition, I don't think.
Okay. I didn't know.
Yeah, it's a really common military service. Everyone's a vet in America, but it's less popular here in Australia.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what go back before the Navy, and I'll come back to acupuncture, but your sport involvement, what's your sport involvement in sport over the years?
Well, I started soccer when I was 7. I played 4 years of soccer in the winter, and that's at Elizabeth. There's a lot of British migrants where I grew up. They invited us over, 10 pounds each back in the day, back in the 60s. And so there's a lot of soccer there. I played tennis in the summer, and a bit of AFL now and again. So, but tennis was the one that I ended up doing well at. I played in state tournaments and did okay at juniors, except some of the best guys ended up beating me. So that sort of stopped a career there. But I certainly put a lot of training in every day of the week for a few years.
It's interesting. Adelaide is a little bit remote compared to, say, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, ACT, or pretty close together. Then you've got South Australia a bit further away and Perth even further away. But both those remote cities produce some strong clusters of athletes. I know I've travelled to Adelaide quite a few times for the purposes of working with different athletes, especially baseball. A lot of baseball coming out of South Australia, and the expansion team in the AFL that I worked with back in the 80s. Quite a few good players there coming out of Adelaide. So it's a strong sporting town, Adelaide, as you already know.
Yes.
So did you get into acupuncture for a reason other than it helped you? Was there, what was the attraction of acupuncture?
Yeah, I think I was always interested in sport and health, and I think I felt from a young age that sitting in the doctor's waiting offices wasn't going to do it for me. So I was always looking for something, and so I just decided it would sound an interesting way to get into health, and also my acupuncturist helped me a bit with my shoulder, which is sore from tennis. But health was always something and acupuncture seemed very mysterious. So one way to learn it was to do it.
Yeah, good. So you moved to Emerald, you've set up your acupuncture practice. How'd the locals respond?
Yeah, they liked it. I never had a big business, but there wasn't a lot of acupuncture here, so they liked it. And basically, a lot of people with injuries, they work hard in the mines and out in the paddocks, and so it was pretty basic stuff. They just wanted to get rid of their pain, and I could relate to that. But my first bit of acupuncture, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
My
first bit of acupuncture.
After I finished acupuncture, I actually got into tennis coaching, went overseas. So actually, my first acupuncture was part-time overseas as part of a tennis training squad, coaching squad.
Where overseas were you working with the tennis?
Well, I was based in Switzerland and based in London, and some of the time I was traveling to professional tournaments, lower level professional tournaments. Once it was the US Open, but mainly lower level with players who weren't making much money. And so I was teaching them, part of a team that was teaching them tennis. I was like the assistant, and I was doing acupuncture on some of the athletes. So it's fairly low key back then.
Yeah, Europe's a great place for tennis players to advance their points and gain experience. There's so many opportunities, so many tournaments not that far apart. I think it's a great, probably the greatest continent for athletes to advance themselves. Have you found that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there was tournaments everywhere, as you guessed, and based in London, you could go to so many tournaments, and much easier than Australia. A lot of tennis players go overseas to base themselves over there too.
Yeah, and if you don't, I guess you're going to struggle to raise your points. So the other reality with tennis, though, is that the money's really good for the top 50 to 100 in the world, but it drops off, pretty quickly. It's a pretty steep cliff after that.
Yeah. I think it's pretty tough for some of them. I think some of them live off McDonald's or something like that, and live off the smell of an oily rag. And if they lose first round, it's not fun for a week. So only the really keen ones stay on, and most of them don't make it to the top. So yeah, it's very tough.
Yeah, but I certainly applaud their commitment to giving it a go and their passion. It is one of those sports though that hasn't been diluted. Like a lot of sports have been splintered and fractioned by politics, and there's different divisions. Generally speaking, tennis has remained fairly unified.
Oh yeah. Since I think so. Yeah, I've certainly from a coaching point of view, I've certainly sort of stayed out of the mainstream. But the players are going okay.
So you're one of the, you're fairly unique, I guess not unique, but you're one of the group within the KSI coaches who's a sports coach, and we want that. We know we can provide training and professional development for everybody, including sports coaches. And the more sports coaches we have involved with KSI, the better it is for the athletes. So you went into coaching and acupuncture. So what attracted you, and how did you find KSI from Emerald?
Well, I basically spent a few years just searching around the internet, but I certainly knew when I was coaching the players that there was a lot missing, funny enough, and so I wanted to learn a bit more about the physical training, and so I just searched around, listened to whole team of big names that were always pushing themselves on the internet, and when I came across your interview, quite funny, you went hard on the plagiarizing and that sort of thing straight off the bat, and it was quite funny because I immediately said that I could click to what the other guys were missing. I could just see what you were talking about straight away, and you came up with some theories to back it up. So straight away I could tell that you had a little bit more going than the other guys. So I just straight away researched it, and then I emailed you and asked what to do.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I won't dwell on it, but there's a number of them out there taking people's money for selling them diluted, copied information. Listen, if they've never coached, or if they've never coached successfully, they've got no right to be teaching it. But it's a free world, and if people are stupid enough, I guess the caveat of the Latin buyer beware. If they're stupid enough to give them their money to somebody who simply cut and pasted out of someone else's text. So hopefully you've realised that what I teach is it's not made up shit. There's a reason I teach it.
Yeah. Straight away I could see that. It just seemed to be everything was sort of congruent, blended together, and it seemed to be a complete system, and it seemed to be fairly stable. The guys I was listening to seemed to be changing their mind a lot, and coming out with new things, and they had, some of them had injuries, and they never really addressed a lot of things. So yeah, it just made sense, and nothing to do with you being an Aussie or anything. It just makes sense.
Well, there's a few points I want to touch on there, but I say one of my favourite sayings that I pick up from these losers is I reserve the right to change my mind. I mean, for fuck's sake, how many times can you change your mind? The human body doesn't change. It's the same human body as it was relatively millions of years ago, but they keep doing 180-degree flips, and they think that's acceptable. And if the market's dumb enough to believe that shit, then good luck to them. But there's 2 points you made. I've got the Aussie point I want to come back to, but you also said you realise something's missing. Now, if an athlete or a coach believes that they've got everything they need to have, then God bless them, they're not going to look for anything more. And that's the first separation of coaches and athletes. Those who are complacent and those who say, listen, I love what I do, but I think there's something missing. And nearly everybody who comes into KSI and enjoys what they've found comes from that same perspective. I just felt there was something missing. So I know that not all coaches think like that. I can tell you, I've worked out at the Australian Institute of Sport on many occasions in many different sports. And there have been times when I've been in a camp down there and I'm working from 6 o'clock in the morning till midnight. I'm out there in the quadrangle doing speed training sessions with the athletes. 99, like every single other coach is in the team room sinking piss. They're just drinking alcohol. Now, maybe things have changed now, but that definitely wasn't the case pre-2000s. So I know that not every coach is saying there's something missing and I've got to go and find it. Do you see yourself as being a bit different than other coaches who may be a bit more complacent, or just I know what I need to know?
Yes, I was quite surprised when I got into coaching, because when I was a player, you just chatted and we're all mates. And then when I got into coaching, as I said, I thought I didn't know a lot, but then the other coaches kept on saying how good they were, and I thought, well, it doesn't make sense, because I could see the problems in the athletes. The other thing was that they seemed like when their players made top level in juniors or good juniors, that was like the pinnacle, which didn't make sense to me, because I thought, if you wanted to win Wimbledon, that would be the pinnacle. And there was a little grey area, or a little bit of a space between what they thought was the awesome and what I thought the athlete wanted. So yeah, there was I didn't understand that. I thought if you want to play to win Wimbledon, why not get them there?
Well, I think it comes down to a personality trait within the human being. If you're really desperate for recognition and you'll grab at every opportunity, you've got a kid who becomes, say, a world junior champion or something like that. And think, wow, look at me, I'm a really good coach. My definition of a really good coach is slightly different. 80% of the athletes that you work with, 80% of the teams you work with, you win the championship. I mean, win the highest level in the world. So that's a pretty high expectation. It's a tough one to meet. But in sport, and I talk about this a lot in Winning Losing and future editions of Winning Losing, where everybody says they know the answer because they've been associated with someone who's won something. Well, it makes it tough for the consumer, and the consumer might be a coach and might be an athlete, to say, well, really, who does know? Because everybody will say, like, I've trained X number of champions and I've trained X number of Olympians, and everybody's got a great story. But from a consumer perspective, and I'm not just talking about end users from a general pop, I'm talking about athletes and coaches at all levels of sport. How do you really find out who can help you become a better athlete or a better coach? that's a challenge. It's a pretty crowded market of people putting their hand up saying, look, I've seen some of the most highly recognised or marketed people in sport who've never won a championship, or if they won a championship, it was actually in a year where they were pushed out and no one listened to them, but they happened to win, or maybe they had lunch with them. So it's a tough industry where people are willing to gild the lily, bullshit a bit about their relationship with winning. So I think for you to find KSI is a pretty big credit to yourself, because as you found, it's a pretty crowded market. A lot of people are saying, I train athletes and I'm really good at it. So what are some of the things that you, and that makes you different others, are looking for in these claims in the marketplace that would separate who you would want to spend more time with as an educator?
I think that was fairly easy, because with tennis, even the coaches whose players were doing well, their theory wasn't matching with the players. So I saw the players hitting it, and they were hitting some great shots. And it seemed like the players were playing well despite the coaching. The best players weren't actually doing what the coaches were asking. So there wasn't a matchup between theory and what was going on. So I always looked for a good theory that made sense. It's as simple as that, and that matched the results. Yeah,
good, because the results. Yeah, and be willing to dig a bit deeper. So I kind of come back to the Aussie bit. I appreciate your loyalty to a so-called fellow Aussie, although I wasn't born in this country. But the irony for me is that Australia's got really got a hard on for Americans and American information. I think the world has, and that's due to Hollywood and the promotion of America. Most of my stuff was really well received in America when I first released it in America in the late 90s. But it's amazing how many people listen to it now that it's come back from America. So when people publish it out of America, and there's a few really good publishers in America who know the Control-C, Control-V button on their keyboard pretty well. Australians seem to take more notice of Americans than they do of Australians. So, when you said it had nothing to do with the fact that I was Aussie, it's actually, I see it the other way, in that a lot of Australians don't want to believe that there's a profit in their hometown. They want to go and get the secret sauce out of America. And the Americans, for the most part, are as dumb as dog shit when it comes to training. And, the reason why America is such a great sporting nation has got more to do with their population than it has their intelligence. It's got nothing to do with their equipment, even though they're the most equipped country in the world. So it's actually surprising for me to hear you say willing to hear in Australia, because, as I said, you're going to lose out in Australia to an Australian if an American was on the scene beating their chest. So I'm actually quite surprised that you thought an Australian might have an idea.
No problem with that. It's all right. No, it's and in fact, my trainer who taught me some of the theories on tennis, I mean, he was an Aussie too. He was from Sydney, so he was much better than any of the mainstream textbooks around the world. So yeah, no problem with Aussies.
The Australians would have trouble understanding that the speed time and the whole concept of 3-digit speed timing actually came out of a little boy in Brisbane. They'd rather believe it came out of some esoteric Canadian's mouth who moved to America, and the concept of lines of movement. People in Australia wouldn't want to know that came out of a little Australian boy. They want to believe it came out of some idiot out of Northeast America who's very functional. It's just tough to see all these little ideas that I developed here in Australia with Australian athletes in the 1980s. Suddenly, all of a sudden they got transplanted to some American idiot who probably wasn't even born when I was developing them. So it's a tough gig from my perspective. I mean, I'm dealing with a publishing house at the moment who've just published another bullshit book, and they don't want to recognise, that it's tough. The Australians don't have a lot of currency in the American mind, and that's in part because Australian doesn't have a lot of currency in the Australians' mind. Australians are very convict mentality, like we can't be good, and it's not possible. I mean, the Canadian ski team were flying me to Canada from the late 80s onwards, and I was working out of a commercial gym at that time. A colleague of mine who went through university in the early 80s was running the gym, and he sat down with the highest profile sporting team in Brisbane at that time, and the assistant coach, or the head and chief of the issue, but went on to become the assistant coach, sat him down in his own office and said, did you hear about that Ian King bullshitting that he goes to Canada to fly to train the Canadian ski team? And that coach has since gone on to become one of the most successful coaches in one of the highest profile professional leagues in our country. And he still thought it was okay to sit there and disparage me. He'd never met me, never had a conversation with me, didn't know the first thing about me. But, the old Aussie way is he's a bullshitter, because there's no way in the world that an Australian would be flying to Canada to teach Canadians how to ski. Not know how to ski, but how to prepare to ski. So I'm really used to this Australian attitude that, you're a dumb fuck Aussie, you wouldn't know what you're talking about. Let's go to North America and find the Holy Grail. So congratulations for willing to learn from an Australian. So
it's funny.
Yeah, it's a circle of laughs. So at the moment, your client base, what percentage tennis, what percentage physical preparation?
All right. Well, I've got only one regular in the physical preparation, so I'm not known as a physical preparation coach, although I see that changing fairly quickly now. And the rest, I've got over 50 to 100 tennis students. Most of them are young, very young, like 4, 5, 6, 7. But I've got a handful of say 9-year-olds, 8 or 9-year-olds that are very keen and dedicated and will want to play the tournament circuit. So mainly it's club players who are just wanting to play a sport, and some of them are very dedicated to train, and also they will, or I think they will be interested in the physical training side of things. Although I need the physical training side of things because there's so much influence to get into squad training at gyms. There's a lot of kids fit things going on. So I think I'll be doing a lot there in the near future.
Yeah. So, for me, although I came in through the window of strength in the 80s when strength was devoid in sport, especially in Australian sport, and I expanded all the physical qualities in sport, and then I expanded all the athletic qualities. And basically now we train the athlete in whatever area they need. There is a perception that, first of all, that what I teach can only apply to athletes and only elite athletes, and therefore a lot of people in the general population are missing the point. I don't care who you train. I don't care which athletic quality, tactical, physical, psychological. I don't care which one it is, and you don't have to do the physical. However, if you're going to train athletes, the better equipped you are to guide them in their best and highest good, the better the whole world is. So I'm happy that you're being exposed to what I teach, because it doesn't matter whether you teach them how to hit the ball or how to displace a non-specific load in a relatively non-specific exercise. It doesn't matter what you're doing. If you do it with a different mindset, like what we call the KSI way, the athletes are better off for it. Have you felt that impact with the athlete?
Well, the athlete that I've trained is an adult, and she's more of a recreational athlete, tennis and runner, and the difference there is quite definite before compared to what she used to do. The athletes, the young ones, I haven't started training them yet, but their mindset is more. Well, one of them does a lot of swimming, for example, and so high volume swim, high volume tennis. I think that they'll need me to sort of maybe get in there fairly quickly and help them recover from all the high level sport, and particularly with tennis being a one-sided sport, which you alluded to in a video interview 2 weeks ago. Yeah, that I think they really need some work very quickly. Would you agree with that?
The irony is that 40 years ago, our greatest battle was, firstly, how do we teach an athlete to play the sport, and secondly, how do we help them recover from the damage of the sport? We've gone a lot further since then. It's not necessarily in a good direction, because now we're saying, how do we prevent them from engaging in inappropriate physical preparation at an inappropriate age? And then how do we unravel the damage that they've already may have done by the time we get them from physical preparation? So, I've seen an incredible shift in the world from where we used to just focus on, like, what's the best way to hit the racket, hit the ball, or hold the racket. And now we're actually having to deal with how do we either prevent them from, going and do some weird shit in the gym at the age of 6, or how do we unravel that if they've already been doing it for a few years? Are you seeing that filter through in your time as a tennis coach?
Yeah, exactly. That's the reason I got into coaching is, you know, I had a sore shoulder, and I believe that why the top players were beating me in juniors. I mean, they did okay. They some of them were high level professionals. The reason was that my technique wasn't as good. I didn't think they were any smarter. I mean, they might have been a bit fitter and stronger, but I thought my technique wasn't up to it. So I went on the search for better technique. And so yeah, the technique was causing the injuries. And even though I ended up, I did do 2 years of gym. I went to a local shed there, the big group of strong guys, and they gave me a nice program with dumbbells and deadlifts. But that was very rare back in the 70s. So yeah, it was all technique as far as I was concerned. And as you said, that's changed now.
Yeah, so we've got a real battle on our hands, and I deal more with broken bodies than I deal with the technical side of sport, unfortunately, these days. So you got in the gym first in the 70s, did you say? It was your first exposure to strength training?
Yeah, I don't know how I got there, but yeah, it was somehow someone must have recommended it for tennis, and I ended up going there for a couple of years with my brother. So
yeah, that's great. It's so rare, as you said, back in the 70s, because Australians didn't embrace strength training for sport until the late 80s. You know, there was a strong interest growing in the early 80s, but certainly in the 70s, there was no interest. Like, you know, you wouldn't have found you would have been struggling to find an AFL player who took strength training seriously in the 70s. You know, there are a few that went off and went rogue and did a bit by themselves, and this really the same in what's called NRL these days, rugby league, which is both, I mean, VFL and AFL back in the day, but New South Wales Rugby League, strength training just wasn't accepted in Australian sport in the 70s. You wouldn't have found too many other tennis players doing strength training in the 70s.
Yeah, I don't know how we got there. I never knew anyone that did it, and the guys that were there, I think they were bodybuilders, and they put together a program which was probably as good as most programs now. But yeah, so just turned up there. Yeah, I don't know anyone else that was doing it. So, and then we just stopped for us.
I'd have more faith in their program than I would have in the average personal trainer's program these days. You know, it was a simpler time, and you know, the body's relatively simple, and the programs were nice and simple. These days, everybody feels guilty unless they're, you know, they're standing on both feet, you know, with a rotation and having 2 modalities like a band, or standing on a Bosu ball or some shit like that. Like, it's a really fucked up environment. You know, it was a simple time back in the 70s because the body's relatively simple. You know, it's as I said, I'm scared of what the athletes are getting now, but I'd be more confident about what you got in the 70s than what you'd get now if you walked into the average, you know, personal training provider these days. So that's my thoughts on that. So
yeah.
You found us and you tested the waters. What's your first educational product or service that you test? Because I mean, like, you're still kicking the tires. You thought maybe you thought I was another bullshitter like the rest of the fuckers who actually don't train anybody but copy a lot of material. What was the first product you tested with?
Well, I did the course. I emailed you and I said, what do I buy? And you said, we'll do the course. So I signed up. And it's before I went on holiday, and I signed up for level 1 and just went through that every day. Is that what you're asking? Just how? So
what were your thoughts about? What were your thoughts about the level 1?
Well, I don't know. It just made sense. Wasn't really astounded. I just thought, well, everything that was there made sense, because being an athlete, I think you can feel what's going on when you're training well or not well. Absolutely. So I dabbled in a few things over the years, nothing really too much. Did more running, I guess, sprint training when I did my AFL. So I didn't do heaps of anything heavy, which is hard to believe now looking at me. But I just thought it made sense. And as I was going through it, of course, I would straight away adjust my training. So I was sort of my guinea pig, and I would just keep adjusting my training to whatever I found out, and it made sense because I'm tight from tennis and imbalances everywhere. So it was all, as an athlete, it just common sense.
The beauty about working with athletes, as opposed to the general pop in the fitness industry, is that athletes are typically more in tune with their body, and the outcomes are more clear. Like the tennis court is this wide, and the game goes for roughly this long, and this is the way to the racket, this is the way to the ball, and et cetera, et cetera. There's a few variables, but fitness industry is so diverse. The goals are so diverse. The stories that people tell are so interesting in terms of the service providers. So I love the objectivity of sport because you're relatively unified, and as many Olympic sports are, you can't dodge and weave. You've got to take that boat over the line in the water, or whatever the sport is, and beat everybody else in the world. So it's a really objective way of measuring whether you're moving forwards or not in your training. So I love that. The only thing that holds any athlete back is that sense of conformity. Well, it's not the only thing. In team sports, there's a lot of conformity. Well, I don't want to do anything different from my teammates because, I might get into trouble. That's an Australian cultural cringe. I don't want to get in trouble for my team for breaking out from the team. The other thing that holds an athlete back would be, really a subconscious, I don't deserve to be a winner. But it's a much cleaner environment to work in because the athletes usually have a really good feel for their outcomes and they're committed to climbing up the ladder of success. And it's a really measurable ladder of success compared to the fitness industry where, there's a sense that if I change my hair and dye it pink or get some more tattoos, I might get some more clients. It's a pretty interesting zoo. So you've done the level 1. What did you do next?
Well, I went straight to level 2, and it was more theory. Yep. So I did that in, I guess, six months at level 1 and 2. And
so you came into KSI feeling there's something missing, and you're looking for something. What are some of the things that you found? What are some of the key takeaways that you found in this journey?
Yeah, straight up, it made sense. Obviously, someone with my life and age, optimal training just made sense to me. I didn't see the purpose of doing heaps of running or heaps of this or that. So the optimal train, every sort of minute counts. So that made sense. And then you've got the stretching. Beforehand, I was a bit unsure for a few years with stretching because before AFL, I think I probably stretched a bit hard and occasionally I'd get a little niggle from stretching. So I wasn't really into doing a lot of stretching beforehand. So that was something that I obviously committed to because I was committed to the program. So that I could feel that making a difference. And then the control exercises, that made sense too, to just because you could feel so much better with posture even after you did a few flutters and scarecrows. You feel much better rather than necessarily doing any bench pressing. So just straight away, the basics, you could feel strong and fit just by doing some stretching and a few control exercises, just the simple things. And then I really I enjoy the speed training. I think it's just such a big part of sport to be able to move well and get that technically right. There's a lot of techniques involved in making that more efficient. So I guess the efficiency philosophy, rather than just going hard, be more efficient. I mean, that's an easier way of doing things anyway. I don't mind doing things the easier way. So get more efficient and your endurance will get better. Does that make sense?
Good stuff. Good stuff.
I have a slight audio problem. You're not coming through very well, Ian.
It's really important, especially if you're on longevity and quality of life.
Yep.
Later in life, you and I know. So the really starting, you came to America, but then Don, how's the audio? Are we back, Don?
Yeah, I'm just getting bits and pieces, but I think you're talking about America now.
You're freezing up, Ian.
Yeah. Okay, so we're all hearing the same thing. All right. There you go. It's very quiet now.
How's that?
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, so the next thing you did was you went to America. You came to our annual camp in America where all the coaches from around the world come together. Like, that really surprised me. The first time you turned up, you're probably the first person out of country, Australia, to go to the annual camp in America. How was that experience? And what drove you to leave Emerald, fly to Brisbane, and then make the international flight?
Yeah, no, that was a big effort, finding my way out of Emerald and just getting on the tractor, off the tractor. But no, it wasn't that bad. So I just felt that, well, I always took your recommendations. That was what you recommended. So it was as simple as that. But basically, I thought just the art of coaching was pretty amazing. I always knew that I think I needed a bit more art in my coaching. So I went over there and it was such a big part of it, just being able to coach better. Because I always saw myself as a bit of an analyst that just accidentally got into coaching. I didn't want to really, I never had any goal of coaching. So yeah, to get to sort of learn how to coach better, which I was one of the things I was definitely missing, was just, it just made sense. I had to be able to get better at it, and I still do, of course.
You must have liked it because you came back in the next year and then you came back the next year. You did 3 years in a row, and who knows, without COVID, you might have even done 4 years in a row. So you must have liked it.
Yeah, that's right. Well, it's mixing with a whole group of guys and girls that you know, all pretty smart, and we're all on the same page. Everyone wanted to get better, so it was sort of it was a great environment. Everyone was on the same page, and there was no one really spruiking about how good they were. It was just everyone was just trying to get better, and everyone's helping me. So yeah, I liked it. It was nothing to do with Emerald. I was happy in Emerald. I didn't need to get out of here, but I really enjoyed the atmosphere.
Yeah, it's great to hear. And we all do. We all enjoy that because it's the only time of the year where we all come together, and we're looking forward to getting that going. You know, once COVID settled down, especially in America and Europe, I can't wait for that to come back because it's a really important part of your development. But it does separate people who are willing to, you know, it's like I say, you can set up a local training studio, you can set up a local personal studio on the corner, and you'll get clients. You'll get clients because it's convenient. But if you want to test the commitment of a client and you say, listen, I'm in another country, you want to see me come to another country, you find out who's committed. And that's what the international camp does, our annual get-together. It really finds out who's willing to get off their ass, leave their couch, leave their house, leave their state, leave their country in some cases, and fly internationally. So it's a really good test. And, you know, you've passed the test. Because I said, you've been there 3 years in a row, and maybe more without COVID. So really impressed with your commitment. And you're turning up in our next camp, where we're going to do 3 days on the art of coaching. So you're in for a treat. You're going to love it. You know, you're well positioned because you know how we roll. You've been to quite a few of our camps, but this is, you know, it's packed full of teaching opportunities. I mean, I'm going to put you in front. On one occasion, I'm going to put you in front of 200 athletes at once.
Yeah. I know.
Right. I mean, well, it's just a beautiful learning opportunity. I mean, you get in front of 200 people, let alone Australian teenagers.
Yeah.
You know, who've never met you before, wouldn't know you from a grain of salt. That's just an example of some of the fun we're going to have in a week's time.
Yeah, can't back out of it now. It's too late.
Well, there'll be some easy ones. I'm going to warm you up easy. Like, there'll be some easy stuff to start with. But yeah, we're going to cover some bases of the art of coaching. So you're really going to love what we're going to do. And you know, the irony for me is we do some amazing things, but we do it with relatively few people. And, you know, you can say, Ian, well, you know, you're a shitty marketer and that's why. But my marketing approach is, if you want us, you'll find us. But it is a little bit, it's almost slightly tragic that the quality of what we offer is shared by so few. And I don't have a problem with that. As I said, it's on me. If I sold how to make your bicep bigger or some more bullshit like that, we might come up with some more numbers. But I understand very few people are truly committed to excellence, or being willing to be different for the sake of the athlete. You know, the power of conformity is pretty strong, or, you know, follow the latest trend. But it's just, we do a lot of work that literally so few people are benefiting from, but it's you take it back and then you share with all your clients, so we get a compounding effect through that. So I'm really proud of what you're doing and looking forward to you taking your further enhanced skill set back to Emerald. We've got a lot of coaches on the call. I'm imagining that there'll be some questions. We've got Belgium, Austria, England, Australia, America, just to name a few countries of coaches on the call. Anyone got a question for Donald? He's a veteran, 3 years international coaching camp. I believe he's up to level 4.
Hey Don, I have a question. First
Hey,
of
David.
all, great to meet you again. I think we've met 3 times now.
That's right.
Yeah. So as a sports coach, let's say that you meet another sports coach and he is interested to learn more about KSI. What would you recommend this coach to start with? Is it a certain DVD or a book or a program, and why?
Okay, what would I recommend? I would, I first of all, I recommend he be an athlete, be a student. So, I mean, I'd sign him up to get himself in order, because usually they've got their own issues, most sports coaches. So, I'd sign him up as a client. And then as far as materials, to be honest, I'd if I could, I'd get him to sign up to level 0 now. Just get straight into the course if he was serious.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
No worries. Thanks, David.
Appreciate it, Dave. So it's not every day we have a sports coach within the program on the line. A lot of our coaches obviously come from all the physical side, so it's good to get a perspective of a sports coach. And we've got some great sports coaches involved, and you will get to meet them over the year in this series of interviews. We've got a number of coaches like Donald who come from a sports coach background and have been attracted to the KSI way. So, if anyone else has a question for Don, certainly interrupt me. So, Don, COVID doesn't affect things in Emerald too much, does it?
No, initially we had a lockdown and we couldn't do a lot. But after that, it was fine because we never had any cases up here. So we're just going back to normal now, except we have to sign in at the tennis club and things like that.
So tennis is really affected as a sport. I mean, a lot of sports, we'll come back to talk about that, especially from the Olympic perspective. But tennis was really smashed in 2020. Not a lot of opportunities. So a lot of domestic high-level athletes were coming back and competing at the bronze and above level. So dropping down and probably putting a bit more pressure and making it harder for some of the lower-level tennis players to even get into the quality rounds, etc. Do you see tennis returning domestically? I know the ATP points are back up as of December in the Australian rankings. So do you see tennis returning to some degree of normalcy in 21 here in Australia?
Well, my out here in the country, my main sort of focus is to get my juniors to tournaments. So locally, definitely we can travel around central Queensland, and I've no doubt, I'm pretty sure that they'll be able to get to Brisbane and play. So I think within Australia, we're fine, but you can't. It's hard to predict what's going to happen. With occasionally they lock things down, but I think within Australia we'll be okay. It's just overseas that's the problem.
Yeah. Okay. So let me ask another question. If an athlete, and I don't know how much exposure you've had to this area, but if an athlete said, "I want to go and get a scholarship at American college for tennis," have you had that?
Well, none of my athletes, but people I have coached or I have to do with have gone over, and yeah, look, it's a great system they've got there in America, because if you guys said earlier, if we go on the circuit and you lose matches, you're on your own and you might not have the support. Whereas you go to a college, you get to improve your tennis in a great environment. So I think it's good for a lot of these players. If it was my student, to be honest, I'd rather them stick with me most of the time because of the coaching. If they want to be good, they need the best. And that may or may not be me, but there's a lot there's a lot of problems with coaching and athletes not going anywhere. So I'd actually, as much as possible, I'm not trying to be too protective. I'd rather them go with me or go with someone I recommend.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because with all respect to the college system, the opportunities and the equipment and the supports they get, et cetera, it scares me when an athlete says they're going to go in college. If that's going to be the peak of their career and they want a life experience, that's really good. It's a great cultural experience. But if they want to go on beyond that, if they want to go, say, in an Olympic sport to the Olympics, if they want to go and be a professional after that, I see a lot of problems as far as their future. Without going into detail, I'm more than happy to go into detail. So I was just wondering if you were all over that, because it's not all it's cracked out to be, unless it's going to be the end of the road for them. If it's the end of the road, great, go out and broaden your cultural experiences. But if you want to take it further, it can be a little bit of a train wreck for the reasons I think we both know. It scares me. So let's shift to the top end. I mean, you probably study the top 10 as much as I do, or more. And the question that I think I just personally don't understand why the lessons from the top 3 in particular aren't absorbed by the world. What do you think separates? And a lot of them are towards the end of their career, and they've had great careers. But what separates the top 3 in the world from all the other tennis players?
Well, I know their mindset is great, and but I go on what I see. I know physical training is important too, and I can't see that straight away, but I can see the way they hit the ball, and I don't think technically players are any better now, and so on average, the techniques of the best players are slightly better than the players that can't make it. That's just a philosophy that I've been working with for a long time. So I know I know it's not very common, but I say technique is a big thing, and their ability to use their technique. Of course, they have to train and get smart, so strategy comes into it, and all that.
Let's look at it from a different perspective. For example, if I said to you the speed of ball, is there a speed of ball velocity difference in the top 100?
Okay. No, I couldn't say on that one. What's the point there?
Well, are the top 3 hitting the ball harder, or is the ball going fast and say, number 99?
Yeah, look, probably yes. I think you might be ahead of me on this. Probably yes, but sometimes it's strategy. But I guess you're saying they're hitting harder.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Right.
I don't have the stats in front of me. What I'm stressing is that the thing that separates the top 3 from the rest of the thousands of tennis players is not how hard they're hitting the ball. Like there's not a lot of separation there. There are so many factors involved in sport that determine how you're going to make this. So let's go through one. Let's go one at a time. I mean, who's your favorite in the top 3?
Federer, I'll say.
Okay, so what is it about Federer that makes Federer as great as Federer has been?
Well, he knows his game. I think they're the top players that he knows. He's got a strategy to match his game. So he moves things around a lot. He mixes it up, and he's got the spins and the angles to do that. So that'd be my first point.
So do you think Federer might be doing something differently than the rest of the tennis world? What do you think he's doing? And I'm talking about behind the scenes as well. Do you think Federer's doing something slightly differently?
His control is basically, if in a nutshell, is ball control under pressure, of course, in all situations is better than the rest. I guess he can hit the ball. I know it sounds simple. He can hit the ball where he wants to with the spin he wants to for long periods of time without breaking down with injury and staying fit.
Well, now you've raised the subject of injury. Let's talk about injury, because injury as a variable is possibly a discriminator at this level. Like, how many games has Federer lost to injury in the last 10 years? I mean, you and I don't know that number. It's not in front of us, but generally speaking.
Not many. I mean, he's had an injury break now, and he did have an injury break earlier on. But for most of that time, he's running at 100% as far as I can see.
Excellent. So what about, who's another top three that we can talk about?
We got the Joker, Djokovic, and Nadal.
Okay, so Djokovic is my favourite for a lot of reasons, but let's talk about Djokovic's injuries. How many games lost Djokovic has experienced in the last decade, roughly speaking?
Well, he's probably been the best, but he did have 6 months with an elbow injury, and I think that might be forehand related. But yeah, he's probably been the best, and I'm aware of his stretching background as a junior. But yeah, he's about six months or a bit longer off. Apart from that, he's just been super fit.
Absolutely. I mean, Nadal probably has had more injuries than those two, but generally speaking, let's go through it even from a domestic Australia perspective. What's the injury status of Australia's top three tennis players? I mean, you don't have the stats in front of us, but generally speaking,
it hasn't been great. I mean, in the last 5 or 10 years, you've had Tomic's had a hip injury. Kokonakis has had 3 injuries. He just has not been looked after. Millman has had a whole deal of shoulder surgeries. When I say injury, they've all had surgeries. When I said injury, Kyrgios probably not getting injured because he doesn't train. He's smart. He doesn't train hard. So or else he'd probably
if you have a look at Kyrgios's body,
yeah,
it's just a waiting. Like it's not a pretty sight.
Yeah.
From an injury perspective, I mean, I wouldn't put him in Raunic's category, but if you have a look at Raonic, it's scary. So what I'm alluding to there is that one of the greatest things we can do for an athlete is give them a body that can play their sport year in, year out, and that for me is one of the greatest discriminating variables in sport, and that the top three. I mean, there's almost a direct inverse relationship between their injury incidence and severity and their rankings. So, if we're putting an athlete out there that's a walking train wreck from a physical perspective, we're basically fulfilling their potential goodbye. And, any coach who wants to tell me they're a great coach or successful better show me a clean slate from an injury perspective, because for me, there's a pretty strong inverse relationship between instance of injury and success on the scoreboard. I'm not interested in the occasional athlete that scraped through. I'm interested in all the athletes working. What percentage of them have injuries? How severe with the injuries? How frequent with the injuries? And that's our first goal. That's our first step, because we get a bit carried away in sports, especially in physical preparation. We think we're godlike and we create these great athletes. Well, the greatest impact is the coach they had when they were 6. And the greatest impact for that is their parents' genetics and their soul selection. I mean, by the time we get involved, we're a pretty small player. In fact, we've got a greater chance of messing them up than we have making them better or failing to correct their limitations. So, there's not a lot of chest pumping that should be done in our industry, and it gets a bit upside down. As a role model, you don't hear me talking too often about it. Look, that athlete won that because I helped them, and there are so many that did, and so many will tell you. They'll tell you to your face that that's why. But it's not for me to say that; it's for the athlete to say that, because first of all, they've got to thank their mum and dad, then they've got to thank their first coach, and it goes on from there. Their willingness to turn up a training from the ages of 6 to 26 and 36. There's so many variables, but the greatest gift we give an athlete is a career without an injury. And I'm so overhearing everybody's injury stories these days, because the sport hasn't changed. The injury incidence increase has got nothing to do with the sport. It's the way that sport is trained. They got pushed too early. They did too much volume too early. They did too much shitty dry land or off court or physical preparation, or if you want to use that crappy word, strength and conditioning. I mean, these are the reasons why we're going through the greatest injury boom in the history of the world. It's tough, but that's the greatest gift we're given. So, Don, if you can take that to the athletes and give them as injury-free career as possible. I know that tennis is one of the most brutal sports in the world. It's up there with golf. It's not quite up there with squash. Squash is slightly more brutal, but any unilateral sport, on a hard surface or predominantly hard surface is going to cause grief. We've got a job on our hands just negating tennis. No, I don't want to be negating the downsides of shitty physical preparation as well, or poor coaching decisions about volume or high volume training at the age of 3. So I really appreciate you working with athletes. I applaud anybody who wants to improve themselves so that they can serve the athlete better.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that you're doing it in a non-metropolitan location means that you've got a pretty important role to play. You've got a lot of people you can serve, especially out there in the rural areas. I've done a lot of work in country Queensland myself, great people, and they really relish the opportunity to get service because they are a little bit neglected from a service perspective to their geography. So you've got some great work you're doing out there, Donald, and I look forward to catching up in Brisbane in a week's time, and we take you to the next level.
That's great, Ian. Thanks for that. Yeah. There's a lot of ground to cover in country Queensland. So it would be great. Looking forward to Brisbane, and thanks to all the other coaches.
And the beauty is when you do drive in country Queensland, you get to see the beauty of nature. I mean, some of the best drive I've ever had, and this is the days when they were allowing sugarcane to be burnt, was driving, say, between Rocky and Townsville, Cairns and places like that, and at sunset with the sugarcane burning, and just drive through the country, provided you're not driving in kangaroo time when the kangaroos are coming out at dusk. But it's a beautiful place to drive. So we appreciate your service to athletes and your service to country athletes. We'll talk to you in Brisbane in a week's time.
Awesome. Thanks, Ian.
Thanks, Donald. Thanks to all the coaches who supported the call.
Thanks, Donald.